Hello and welcome back to the Consistency Project Podcast. My name is Patrick Cummings. As always, I'm here with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week on the show, we aim to simplify the science of nutrition, health, and fitness, cutting through the noise to focus on the principles and practices that will help you perform better, feel better, and live better. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, E.C.
Hey, what's up?
Greetings to you.
Greetings.
We're going to talk about, I'm excited about this. I've hoped we would cover this in an episode soon. So we're going to talk about colostrum today. We're going to talk about the science and skepticism surrounding colostrum supplementation, some things we're going to cover, what colostrum is and how it differs between humans and bovines, the current state of research on colostrum's health and performance benefits, and how to critically evaluate supplement marketing claims, because of course we have to hit on that every time we talk about supplements. The big thing that we're going to try to answer, or the big question is, does colostrum supplementation live up to its health and performance claims, or is it just another overhyped trend? Let us begin at the beginning. What the heck is colostrum for folks who maybe haven't heard of it or don't know why the heck we're talking about it?
Colostrum. Yeah, I've actually gotten a bunch of questions on this. I'm like, okay, it's time. It is time. Colostrum is the first milk produced after pregnancy. And then after a couple of days, colostrum becomes transitional milk. And then eventually mature milk starts about 10 to 15 days after pregnancy. Now, the different milks, colostrum, transitional, mature, they each have different nutritional characteristics. Colostrum tends to be higher in many of the nutrients, specifically protein and vitamins and antibodies, compared to mature milk. And of course, the antibodies are what help develop the baby's immune system. Even some of the proteins, lactoferrin gets a lot of attention, appear to have health effects beyond just supplying protein to the body. It looks to be involved with, the immune system. But so all of this has led to this general interest in using colostrum for various ailments and, of course, everyday supplementation for general health. Now, the colostrum that is trending in our supplements is bovine colostrum, so the substance that is produced naturally by cows about 24 to 72 hours after giving birth. And no surprise, bovine colostrum does not have the same exact composition as human colostrum. Compared to human colostrum, bovine colostrum contains less lactose, but more protein, more vitamins and minerals, and a wider range of kind of these antibodies and growth factors. But I think it's important to understand that the composition, even between different cows or different breeds of cattle, is going to be different because of the genetic differences, because of the different nutrition that they might be given at different farms and all of this stuff. And so I think it's important to do a reality check on that, because the composition of this colostrum is going to be so variable that we're back to this idea that it's going to be hard to determine what exactly is the important part of the mixture, right? It kind of reminds me actually of the ashwagandha podcast we did, that ashwagandha is this plant that people take for adaptogenic properties, kind of this ability to adapt to stress, if you will. But the problem with ashwagandha is that the composition of the various kind of active ingredients really changes from plant to plant, as well as where it's grown in the world, all of that stuff. And so figuring out what might be causing the adaptogenic effect and at what dose is really challenging to do, because if you go harvest ashwagandha from two different places, you're going to end up with totally two different compositions, right? And so the same thing is going to be true here with the colostrum. Is it the lactoferrin protein with all the health effects? And if it is, then how much do we need? Or is it the antibodies? And if it is, how much of each of the antibodies do we need? And I am going to guess that it's probably all of it that matters. No surprise that probably the colostrum has this mixture of different nutrients and antibodies because the baby needs all of it. But still, it does bring the question of like, okay, well, if we're going to then assign this for a therapeutic reason, we're going to have to know, okay, well, what the concentration should be to cause the effect and what really is the important part because of the variability across it, right? And it does kind of beg the question to me, as well as if we think about when colostrum is used, it's kind of in the first 72 hours maybe. So why don't humans produce it for babies longer than 72 hours if it's so important for health? Like, why, when you're 40 years old, do you need colostrum? Why did it go away at 72 hours versus something that we needed to keep around for so long? Just because something happens naturally doesn't mean it's the most optimal process. And so I can understand that maybe, we want to look into it and we want to research it. I think there could be some really cool targeted effects of it, that maybe some mothers who can't produce milk might end up wanting to supplement with bovine colostrum in their child. So I'm open to the ideas that it could be useful, but I think, again, some of that stuff of like, okay, we got this really interesting mixture of a nutritional composition that we don't really know what's driving what, that could be very variable from different sources, that naturally we don't get exposed to after 72 hours, that just sort of taking it randomly as a supplement to be, quote, optimized, I'm going to be pretty skeptical. I'm going to be pretty skeptical. And I don't think the research is there yet to say that this is something that we really kind of need for general health. And unfortunately, that's how it's marketed. You know, when I just Google benefits of colostrum supplementation, you get things like, quote, gut health and better immunity and reduce inflammation and all these super general terms that we hear all the time. But again, in the backdrop of what I just sort of laid out, it's like, okay, this might just be a lot of marketing mumbo jumbo.
Okay, so we're going to talk about a few of those things, but what I think about is a conversation we've had before, which is this belief that natural is always better. Is that part of also this, where if it came from, I got it from my mother, right, therefore it's natural, therefore I should still have it? Is that a little bit of the thought process or the chain of logic that people use to justify this?
I guess, but it's sort of an interesting application, because if we're going to go with the whole natural is always better, then you would have to kind of ascribe the notion that you probably don't need it after being older than 72 hours. Yep. And certainly, why would you want it from a cow? Right. So it is this sort of weird blend of, oh, it's natural, but it's like, but that's not what naturally happens. And we don't naturally get bovine colostrum. So to me, it's just an odd application of believing what you want about what's natural, right?
Yeah. You don't naturally get bovine colostrum. An understatement if I've ever heard that. Okay.
Let's clip that one for social media.
Yeah. Two-part question. One, you mentioned that you are starting to get a lot of questions about colostrum. Yeah. This is sort of something that I've stumbled upon relatively recently. So first question is this relatively new in the market that like this is an option for people? And second question is there a lot of research that has been done on this, regardless of whether or not it's been around for a while? And what does that research tell us, if anything?
Yeah, it does seem like it's really become kind of one of the trendy supplements. I didn't look into kind of the growth of the market or anything like that, but it certainly seems in the last few years it's been quite trendy. In terms of what the research has found for colostrum supplementation on health, I would say there isn't a lot that's conclusive out there. There's a 2020 review of colostrum supplementation in adults, and they found, quote, inconclusive evidence to substantiate a food health claim, end quote. And then a 2021 review of 24 studies of both kid and adult populations found, quote, the studies included did not consent to provide strong evidence on its use in any situation. All right. End quote. So we'll put both of those in the show notes. With that 2021 review of the 24 studies, I did spend some time looking through the 24 different studies to sort of see, hey, were they looking at populations and topics that our audience tends to care about with kind of general health and fitness goals? I didn't see a ton. Some of the studies were using colostrum supplementation for vaginal dryness, or let's say reducing vomiting and diarrhea in preterm infants, which, both of those are fine enough to consider. But when people come to me and they're like, oh, should I take a supplement? For general wellness, it's like, no, if we have any evidence for some of this stuff, it might be a more targeted application. Mm-hmm. But this is why it's so important to have a diagnosis or a problem that we're trying to improve to actually see that the supplement is doing anything. Like if you have a preterm infant with vomiting and diarrhea, you can see that the supplement is actually helping with that, right? Mitigate that, versus just sort of starting to take it on a Tuesday because you feel whatever, and then all of a sudden you're just like, oh, I'm taking colostrum. It's sort of like, why? Yeah. Right? And I'm going to tell you that, it's not going, I'm very confident telling you that colostrum is not going to outperform consistent diet and exercise and sleep and all of the stuff that we talk about all of the time. Now, I did also poke around a little bit to see if there's any more research, of course, since 2021. I did find a recent trial from 2023. They were looking at inflammatory markers in older adults, say 50 to 69, and that after taking a bovine colostrum supplement for 12 weeks, a few of the common inflammatory markers that we've actually talked about, like CRP and IL-6, were significantly decreased in those that were supplementing. This is the OI paper in the show notes. And I think that's a great first step, but there's lots of questions that remain when you see something like this. Of course, will it be replicated? But more so, does that decrease in inflammatory markers actually change the trajectory of a disease? And does it actually reduce the risk of death or disease versus just changing these inflammatory markers? Does the person get better, or do people that were otherwise healthy now have less risk for heart disease, cancer, on we go? And then, of course, the $1,000,000 question, does it outperform, I don't know, eating more fruits and vegetables or doing the anti-inflammatory regular exercise that we talk about all the time? Mm-hmm. So you can see something like this and it looks promising, but it's really miles and miles away from the answer that people want. And that is, this is actually going to reduce disease risk. And this is actually potentially going to improve the quality or the longevity of my life. It just isn't conclusive research. And this is what's so classic of supplement marketing is they could very well take that study and say, colostrum reduces inflammation. And it's correct in the sense of the accuracy of what they found, but it's not correct in the sense of what people want it to mean for the quality and health of their life.
Anything different or anything worth mentioning on the performance side of things if colostrum is looked at or taken as a performance enhancement supplement of some kind?
Yeah, not much there either. So the reason why people are really interested in colostrum from a performance perspective is because of the potential effect on the immune system. So especially for endurance athletes, they tend to be prone to more upper respiratory infections, particularly during these periods of intense training. So obviously an upper respiratory infection tends to make it hard to train or to perform well. So the idea would be, okay, if this can positively affect the immune system, maybe we have less of those. And so the person can train harder and longer, all that stuff. In that 2021 review paper that I just mentioned, there was one study that looked at upper respiratory infections, and it was actually a study with only 25 people back in 2014. They did find a decrease in upper respiratory infections in recreational active males with the bovine supplementation. And nothing against the study per se, but they didn't test performance. Yes, they were looking at, hey, what does this do for upper respiratory infections? And that's fine enough. But if the assumption is that the upper respiratory infections is what's hindering performance, we actually want to then measure performance. And I'm not saying that they don't know this. It's just they could have been at the limitations of what their study was designed to do. But again, if you're thinking about, I'm going to take colostrum because it's going to affect my performance, we'd actually want studies that show performance improves, not just a decrease in upper respiratory infections, because guess what? We have hundreds of those studies with creatine, right? Now, I did find another study from 2024, the Durkalek-Mikowski paper in the show notes. It's another randomized controlled trial, 12 weeks, looking at bovine colostrum supplementation in endurance athletes. They were specifically looking at antibodies, and they found there was a little bit of an increase in antibodies in the saliva for those taking bovine colostrum. The saliva is really kind of our first line of defense for the immune system, but there wasn't an increase in antibodies in the blood, which suggests that the bovine colostrum supplementation doesn't really have this systemic broad effect on our overall immune response. But again, they did not look at performance. Again, I'm not against these studies because not every study can be the most robust, perfect study, and oftentimes we have to do things in steps. But if you're thinking about, I just heard all of this marketing about colostrum for performance, we need studies that actually measure performance. We need studies that measure their sprint times, that measure their run times, that measure their deadlift to say, okay, they took colostrum and the deadlift went up, or they took colostrum and the 5K time went down. And I think just one more study that I wanted to bring up since those other ones, 2025 paper, this was looking at various supplements and the effect on soccer, specifically performance. And they actually concluded in this review paper that bovine colostrum could improve athletic performance in soccer players. Based on the research I had just seen prior and just talked about, I was like, well, this is odd. I don't know that I believe this. So I kind of dove down into finding the original research paper that they were quoting from. And that original paper, yes, they found that there was some decrease in inflammatory markers, but, quote, bovine colostrum supplementation had no significant effect on athletes' performance, end quote. So this is where sometimes our studies, how to explain it, it's almost like a game of telephone that sometimes down the line when people are kind of collecting all of the research, they're going to make their own conclusions and statements, and why it's really important to sometimes go back to the original research and look at what they really found and make sure that you understand their conclusions. because oftentimes, somebody might interpret a decrease in inflammatory markers as the same thing as increasing your back squat, when in fact, they are not the same thing at all. It's so easy for people to make this jump from, oh, well, the inflammation markers went down. It must be healthy. It must decrease infection. It must help performance. And no, these markers go up and down all the time. They change in different contexts that you can't make that leap. And so you really want to wait until you have confirmation of the outcome you want before drawing the conclusion that this thing is going to improve my performance.
What advice do you have for us when we see something like a colostrum and whatever the claims may be? How do you advise people navigate understanding what's real, what isn't real, what's true, but with a heavy dose of, with an asterisk? What do we do with all of this?
That's true. Yeah, asterisk. FDA does not support these statements.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the claims are this really, really gray area, and they're allowed to be. Supplements cannot say things like they cure cancer or they cure heart disease, but they can say things like, quote, supporting wellness. And so this is kind of what I was getting to with the performance piece. I think this is where a lot of times we fill in the gaps that we want. We see something that says support wellness, and then in our mind, we think, well, that must mean keep me well, which means prevent disease. And no, that's not what supporting wellness means. In fact, supporting wellness is meaningless, to be honest. It's certainly not saying it's preventing disease, and it's 100% not saying it will reverse disease.
Yep.
I think in this idea of supporting wellness, it's important to point out that the body uses essential nutrients like protein, like vitamins and minerals in any function you want, in your immune system, in better performance, in cognitive function. So if a supplement has any of those nutrients, they can make some claims that make it sound more powerful than it is, and that you're going to kind of, quote, fill in those gaps. There are vitamins, a lot of B vitamins are used in cognitive function. So any product with B6 can say something like supports cognitive function. And I think people think, oh, I need that product so that I maintain cognitive function, I prevent cognitive decline, when in reality, lots of things have that vitamin that will help your current cognitive function, but it doesn't necessarily prevent, or cure other disease states. And so I go through all of that because I like to point out this sort of comparison. I could argue that a banana does all of the things that colostrum is marketed for. A banana supports gut health. Why? Because it has fiber. A banana supports immunity. Why? Because potassium is needed in your immune system. A banana can support performance or muscle recovery because it's got carbs to refill muscle glycogen, right? A banana supports wellness because it contains lots of essential vitamins and minerals. So this is where I think we can get lost, because people will see the colostrum as something so novel and different than the banana, when in reality, they might be sources of nutrients that we need overall. And so I think, again, people think they're getting something very specific and unique, when in reality, they might just be adding some nutrients to the diet that they could get elsewhere and probably better. And so I guess all of that to say, we got to be really wary of these various nutrition food trends. I mean, that might be the most obvious statement ever, besides the fact that we don't get bovine colostrum naturally. Wow, we're really on a roll in this podcast. But I think this is why, very generally, drug discovery, when successful, is going to produce very different effects, or very different powerful effects in terms of curing or reversing disease that whole foods cannot, right? Because it's actually giving us something that we don't have naturally, where we're taking something in some form or at some dose that we can't get through the adequate diversity of diet of mostly whole unprocessed foods and exercise and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, again, I think some of these different new trends out there might have some very specific targeted applications that could be interesting and could be worth researching. But if we're shooting for wellness, we need to stop looking at these different trends, and we need to realize that we already have the answer for wellness. It's not colostrum, it's not collagen, it's not, I don't know, whatever the next one is. It's don't smoke, don't drink excessively, maintain a healthy weight, eat lots of fruits and veggies, sleep enough, all the stuff that we say all the time.
Thank you, EC. Thanks, everybody out there, for listening or watching. Thank you for your ratings and your reviews. And thank you for sharing the show with your friends who possibly just spent $60 on a bag of colostrum. And tell them you save it next month. Spend it on me. Tell them that. Tell them to spend it on you instead of on colostrum. We appreciate it when we see you share the show on social media. So thank you in advance for doing so. EC and I will be back next week for a brand new episode of the Consistency Project podcast.